The Galactic Council chamber was built to impress. That was the honest truth of it, and everyone inside knew it. The ceiling rose 400 meters above the floor, carved from a single piece of black Valorian stone that had been hauled across 6 star systems at a cost that could have fed 3 colonies for a decade. The seats were arranged in a perfect circle, tier upon tier, each species given a position determined by the length of their membership. The oldest sat highest. The newest sat at the bottom, looking up. It was not an accident that the newest sat at the bottom. Ambassador Vale of the Kethar arrived early, which was his habit. He was old by most species standards, old enough that the gray had moved past his temples and taken over entirely, old enough that his joints made their opinions known every morning. He carried a single data chip in his left hand. He had not slept the night before. He took his seat in the middle tiers, which was where the Kethar had sat for 300 years. Not old enough for the top, not young enough for the bottom. The middle, always the middle, where you could see everything clearly and change almost nothing. Other delegates filed in over the next hour. The Volkai came last, as they always did. Grand Consul Dreth led their delegation, 7 of them, robes the color of deep water, moving like they owned the floor because, in most practical senses, they did. The Volkai had held a council majority for 60 years. They had expanded their territory 11 times in that period. They were, by every measurable standard, the dominant power in the known galaxy. Dreth did not look at Vale when he passed. He never did. The session was called to order by the council speaker, a thin Mehari woman named Solis who had been doing this job for 22 years and had the permanent expression of someone who has stopped being surprised by anything. She called the first item. Territory Review, Sector 7 Gamma. Vale sat up straighter. Sector 7 Gamma was a spiral arm corridor, not especially rich in resources, not especially populated but strategically positioned between 2 major trade lanes. 3 years ago, a small species called humanity had established their 4th colony there. Kepler 7, 40,000 people, miners mostly, some farmers, a medical station. Now the Volkai wanted the corridor. The debate began, as these debates always began, with maps. A Volkai delegate stood and walked the council through the strategic value of the corridor. He used words like natural extension and historical claim and underutilized space. He had a pleasant voice. He smiled a lot. The maps he showed made the corridor look empty, which it was not, but the colony markers were very small and the Volkai territory markers were very large and color-coded in a confident shade of blue. Several other delegates spoke. Most of them said things like, "We understand the strategic concern, and of course this must be handled diplomatically, and we trust the council's judgment." None of them said no. Vale listened to all of it. Then the speaker called for any remaining comment before the vote, which was the usual formality. Usually no one spoke at this stage. The outcome was already understood, and Vale stood up. There was a small ripple through the chamber. Not shock, just notice. The Kethar ambassador was on his feet, which was unusual. He was old and quiet and had not made a speech in 4 sessions. "Ambassador Vale," the speaker said, "you have the floor." He did not use notes. He had thought about what he wanted to say for 3 weeks, and he knew it by heart. "I want to talk about humanity," he said. His voice carried well. He had given a lot of speeches in this chamber, and he knew how to use the acoustics. "I visited Earth 11 years ago," he said. "I was part of the first formal Kethar diplomatic contact mission. I spent 4 months on the planet's surface. I read their history. I spoke with their leaders. I ate their food, which I will say was considerably better than I expected." He paused. No one laughed. "I want to share some of what I learned." Dreth was watching him from the upper tiers with an expression that was not quite boredom and not quite irritation. Something between the two. "Humanity," Vale said, "has been a space-faring civilization for 61 years. In that time they have established 7 colonies, developed 2 new propulsion systems, and made contact with 14 other species. By those numbers they look young, small, manageable. He let the words sit there. They are not. He touched the data chip in his hand. He did not use it. He did not need it. Humanity spent 10,000 years in continuous conflict with itself, he said. Not occasional wars, not border skirmishes. Continuous, total, civilization-level warfare with interruptions, yes, but no long peace. They fought over land, over water, over belief, over the color of each other's skin, over words written in books, over lines drawn on maps that kept changing. They invented weapons specifically designed to destroy everything within a given radius, and then improved those weapons 17 times. They developed diseases as tools of war. They burned each other's cities. They buried each other in unmarked ground, and then built new cities on top of the graves and named streets after the people who had done the burying. The chamber was quiet. This was not the usual kind of council speech. They did all of this, Vale continued, and they survived. Not just survived, they kept building. They kept having children. They kept writing music and painting walls and arguing about philosophy in the same breath as they were sharpening their knives. And then 61 years ago they looked up, saw the stars, and decided to go there. He looked at Dreth. They are 61 years into space travel, he said, and they are already better at it than most species are after 200, because they have spent 10,000 years learning how to fight and how to survive, and how to turn catastrophic loss into a reason to try harder. That is not a boast on their behalf. That is simply what their history shows. He paused. If this council authorizes a military strike on a human colony, he said, it will not be the beginning of a campaign. It will be the beginning of a war. A war this council is not prepared for, because you are looking at their fleet numbers and their colony count and their years in space, and those numbers look small, and I am telling you that those numbers are the wrong thing to look at. He sat down. The chamber was quiet for a moment, just a moment. Then Dreth spoke from the upper tier without standing, which was his way of signaling that he did not consider the matter worth the effort of standing. The Kethar ambassador, Dreth said, has given us a very vivid history lesson. A small ripple of laughter from the upper tiers. And I am sure the humans are very impressive in their own small way, but I think the ambassador may be confusing what a species was with what a species is. Humanity has been to space for 61 years. We have been to space for 900. They have 7 colonies. We have 83. They have 1 combat fleet of 42 vessels. We have a standing military of 11,000 ships. He let that number breathe. I respect the ambassador's caution, Dreth said, in a tone that made it clear he did not. But I would remind the council that every species when first encountered looks more dangerous than it is. This is natural. We are cautious creatures. It is what has kept us alive. He paused. Caution is a virtue, paralysis is not. Another ripple of laughter, a bit louder this time. Vale did not respond. He looked at his hands. 3 other delegates spoke after that. 2 of them referenced Dreth's fleet numbers. One of them noted that the human colony on Kepler-7 had not been formally registered with the Council's Territorial Bureau, which was technically true and entirely irrelevant. The session moved toward its conclusion the way these sessions always moved, like water finding the lowest point, inevitable, gravity-driven. The vote was called. Vale voted no. The Kethar were 4 votes, 4 noes against 47 yeses. The motion passed. The Volcae fleet was authorized to move into Sector 7 Gamma, take control of the corridor, and invite the Kepler-7 colony to negotiate terms of integration into Volcae-administered space. The word invite was in the official record. 11,000 ships was what the invitation looked like in practice. Dreth accepted the vote with a small, satisfied nod. He spoke briefly to the delegates beside him. He smiled. He was a man who had just gotten something he wanted, and he looked exactly like that. Vale collected his data chip. He stood. He did not look at anyone. He walked out of the chamber through the side door. the one the lesser delegations used. The corridor outside was long and cold and lit with the blue-white lights the council favored, lights that made everyone look a little ill. His footsteps echoed. No one else was out here yet. The session would continue for another hour: trade matters, infrastructure votes, the usual business of running a galaxy. He stopped at the window at the end of the corridor. The view from the council station was remarkable. You could see 3 nebulae from this angle, clouds of color that looked soft and close but were hundreds of light years across. Between them, barely visible, the smear of the Orion corridor, where Sector 7 Gamma sat, where Kepler 7 sat, where 40,000 people were currently going about their lives with no idea that a vote had just been taken about them. Vale stood at the window for a long time. He thought about Earth. He thought about the 4 months he had spent there. He thought about the museum he had visited in a city called Johannesburg, a museum about a conflict that had ended before humanity reached space, a dark and careful exhibition about what people had done to each other and why, and what it had cost, and what had been rebuilt after. He thought about the woman who had curated the museum. Her name was Dr. Asand. She was 70 years old, and she had shown him through every room with the calm, level manner of someone who believed that remembering a terrible thing was the only honest tribute to it. He thought about what Dr. Asand had said at the end of the tour, when he asked her how humanity had moved past it. "We didn't," she had said. "You don't move past it, you carry it. The trick is not letting it crush you while still letting it matter." He thought about that now. He thought about the vote. He thought about Dreth's smile. He pressed his hand against the cold glass of the window and looked at the stars, and he thought about what was coming, and he did not feel righteous about having spoken. Righteousness was a young feeling, and he was very old. He felt only the particular grief of a person who has said the correct thing at the correct time and been heard by no one. His aide found him there 20 minutes later. Young woman, Kethar, sharp and careful and loyal. Her name was Fen, and she had worked for him for 6 years and knew better than to speak first. "The vote passed," Vale said. He did not turn from the window. "Yes," Fen said. "The fleet will move in 48 hours. The Volkai standard mobilization time is 36 hours, Fen said carefully. "If they prioritize." 36 hours, then. He was quiet for a moment. "Send a message to our consulate on Earth. Standard diplomatic courtesy. Alert them to the Council's decision. Tell them the Kethar delegation voted against." "Do you want to send anything more than that?" He thought about it. He thought about whether there was a sentence he could write that would be useful. He could not think of one. The humans would receive the news through their own channels soon enough. They had people watching the Council. All species did, even the ones pretending they didn't. "No," he said, "just the vote record." Fen made a note. "And your schedule for the next session." "Clear it." She paused. "Clear all of it." "All of it." He finally turned from the window. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I don't think the next few sessions are going to look like anything we've planned for." Fen looked at him. She had the expression of someone who wanted to ask a question and had calculated that the answer would not be comforting. She kept the question to herself. "Yes, Ambassador," she said. Vale looked back at the window one last time. At the nebulae. At the corridor between them. At the small invisible point in space where Kepler 7 was, where 40,000 people were waking up or sleeping or eating or arguing about ordinary things. He had done what he could do. He had stood in a room full of powerful people and told them the truth, which was all an ambassador could do when the room had already made up its mind. He was not naive enough to think the truth would have changed anything. The vote was decided before the session opened, as most council votes were. But the record would show he had said it. The record would show the Kethar had voted against. That mattered in some small, long-term historical way. It did not matter in any way that would help Kepler 7. He picked up his data chip. He put it in his pocket. He walked back down the corridor toward the station's exit, footsteps echoing in the cold blue-white light. He had said what needed saying. What happened next was no longer his sin. The Volkai fleet arrived at Kepler 7 on a Tuesday. The colonists would remember that detail later, in the strange way that survivors always remember the irrelevant specifics: the day of the week, the weather, what they had eaten for breakfast. Tuesday. Clear skies over the northern settlement. A shipment of ore processing equipment had just arrived from Earth and was sitting in the landing yard, still in its crates. The fleet came out of faster-than-light travel in a wide formation, which was standard Volkai doctrine: spread out, present a maximum silhouette, let the target understand the scale of what it was looking at before any weapons were fired. 1,100 ships in the advance force. The full 11,000 were back in Volkai space, ready. This was the opening hand, and it was already more firepower than Kepler 7's 3 defense platforms could answer. Commander Yiris stood on the bridge of the flagship Sovereign Reach and watched the colony resolve on the forward display. It was small. A main settlement of about 40,000, a secondary mining outpost another 200 kilometers north, and the orbital platforms, 3 of them, old by Volkai standards, the kind of hardware a young colony built when budget and time were both short. He had reviewed the intelligence files on Kepler 7 twice on the transit. He knew the colony's layout, its population count, its resource output, the names of its 3 elected administrators. He knew the defense platforms were armed with kinetic rail systems and short-range plasma batteries, which were adequate for meteor deflection and piracy deterrence, and almost nothing else. "This should be fast." "Hail them," he said. The communications officer opened the channel. Yiris straightened in his chair and looked at the display and began the speech he had rehearsed: the formal demand for negotiation, the offer of integration into Volkai-administered space, the 30-minute window for response. He delivered it cleanly, professional. He was not a cruel man. He genuinely believed the colonists would look at 1,100 ships and make the sensible decision. The channel stayed open for about 40 seconds. Then one of the defense platforms fired. It was a single kinetic round, old propellant, the kind of weapon that Volkai military engineers had stopped worrying about 2 generations ago. It hit the shields of a light patrol vessel near the formation's edge and accomplished nothing structural. But it was a shot. At 1,100 ships. From a colony of 40,000 people. Yiris blinked. He looked at his weapons officer. His weapons officer looked back at him. "Sir," the communications officer said, "the colony is broadcasting." On screen. The face that appeared was not one of the 3 elected administrators. It was a woman in a miner's work suit, gray-haired, maybe 65, standing in what looked like a community assembly hall. Behind her, visible through a wide window, people were moving with purpose, not panicking, moving. The difference was important, and Yiris noted it without quite understanding why it unsettled him. "This is Kepler 7, the woman said. Her voice was level. "We received your speech. We are not interested in integration. We are formally informing you that you have entered human-claimed space without authorization, and we are requesting that you withdraw immediately." She paused. "We have transmitted this exchange to Earth Command. Whatever happens here is on your record." The channel closed. Yiris sat with that for a moment. Then he gave the order. The first volley from 1,100 ships hit Kepler 7's orbital platforms in under 4 minutes. The platforms were well built. They absorbed more than the intelligence files suggested they should, but the outcome was not in question. The first platform broke apart at the 6-minute mark. The second went dark 8 minutes after that. The third managed to get 3 more shots off before the end, none of which did measurable damage, all of which were aimed with what Yiris could only describe as deliberate precision. They were not firing wild. Even at the end, they were aiming. He filed that away somewhere. The ground assault was supposed to come next. Standard doctrine: destroy orbital capability, demand ground surrender, land peacekeeping forces to administer the transition. Clean. Predictable. What happened instead was not clean. The first Volkai landing craft touched down at the edge of the main settlement, and the ramp had not fully descended before someone shot at it from a water tower 300 meters away. The shot was from a hunting rifle. It was not a military weapon. It bounced off the landing craft's hull without leaving a mark. The second landing craft set down near the ore processing yard and was hit by an ore hauler, a massive industrial vehicle, fully loaded, that someone drove at it at top speed and then jumped clear of in the last seconds. The hauler weighed approximately 800 tons. The landing craft's landing struts held, but the impact crumpled the forward loading ramp, and the craft could not deploy its troops. The third landing craft never touched down. Someone on the ground had rerouted power from the settlement's main reactor into the emergency magnetic accelerator system, the one normally used to launch ore canisters into orbit for collection, and fired a series of 800-kilogram ore canisters at the descending craft in rapid succession. They were not precision weapons, but there were a lot of them, and the third landing craft veered off and took significant damage to its port engine. Yura stood at the display and watched his neat operation become untidy. "What are they shooting with?" he asked. His intelligence officer looked genuinely puzzled. "Mining equipment, sir. Industrial machinery. We're seeing—" He stopped, looked again. "We're seeing converted supply freighters moving to intercept our secondary patrol wing." Supply freighters. They've mounted the ore accelerators externally, jury-rigged. They shouldn't be able to fire at that angle, but they are. A pause. "One of our patrol vessels has taken a hit." Yiris looked at the display. 40,000 farmers and miners and teachers and doctors with no military and no military hardware, and 30 minutes of warning, had just damaged a Volkai patrol vessel with a repurposed ore launcher bolted to the outside of a cargo freighter. He felt something cold move through him then. He could not have named it precisely. It was not fear, not yet. It was closer to the feeling of stepping onto ground you believed was solid and feeling it shift slightly underfoot. "Get the ground troops deployed," he said. "Full force, end this quickly." Suhan Park was 67 years old and had lived on Kepler 7 for 11 years. She had come out here from a city called Busan, on Earth, after her husband died and her children were grown, and she found that she did not want to spend the remaining decades of her life in a place where everything reminded her of the years before. Kepler 7 was not comfortable. The soil was wrong for most things she wanted to grow. The winters were long and the light was a different color than Earth light, slightly more orange, and it had taken her 3 years to stop finding it strange. She loved it here. She was surprised by how much she loved it. When the ships appeared on Tuesday morning, she was in the community hall because the emergency broadcast had pulled everyone in, and Administrator Chen was trying to keep people calm and doing a reasonable job of it, all things considered. Suhan sat in the back row and listened to the broadcast from the Volkai fleet, the formal voice, the careful words, and watched the faces of the people around her. She was not afraid. She noted this with some curiosity. She thought she should be afraid, and she was not. She was angry in a way that felt very quiet and very deep, like a stone at the bottom of cold water. When Administrator Chen finished her response, the one Yiris watched on his display, she turned to the room and said they had maybe 20 minutes before things got serious, and asked what everyone was prepared to do. The room answered. Suhan was not young enough for the defense platforms and not trained enough for the freighters. What she could do was get the children to the mine shafts, which went deep enough into the rock that orbital bombardment couldn't reach them, and that was what she did. She moved through the settlement for 40 minutes while the sky above was lit with things she could not name, gathering children and their parents, the ones who were not fighting, the ones with small ones to protect, and moving them into the earth. She got 63 people into Shaft 7 before the ground forces came. The shaft entrance was a heavy industrial door, sealed from inside. She pulled it shut behind her and locked it and sat down with her back against the cold metal and listened to the sounds coming through the rock. She could not see anything. She could only feel the vibration when something large fell nearby and hear the muffled sounds of things happening above. At some point a child, 4 years old, maybe 5, a boy named Davy who belonged to one of the mining engineers, climbed into her lap and went asleep. She sat there with Davy asleep on her lap and listened to the world above change. She had a lot of time to think. She thought about what she had seen when she left the Voakai broadcast on. Before she went to collect the children, she had watched the rest of it, the part after Administrator Chen closed the channel. She had watched the formation on the skyfeed, all those ships. She thought about what her father had told her once, when she was young and frightened about something she could no longer remember. He had said, "The size of the thing coming at you is not the thing that determines what happens next. What determines what happens next is what you do in the next 5 minutes." Her father had been a very practical man. She thought about that. She thought about the ore hauler that someone had driven at a landing craft and jumped clear of. She did not know who had done that. She hoped they had jumped in time. It took the Voakai ground forces 4 hours to establish control of the main settlement. Not 30 minutes, not 1 hour. 4 hours against people with hunting rifles and industrial machinery and a colony's worth of accumulated stubbornness. Yiris received the final control report and read it 3 times because the casualty figures did not look right and he wanted to be sure he was reading them correctly. He was. 17 Voakai soldiers dead, 89 wounded, 1 patrol vessel with significant damage, 2 landing craft disabled. From 40,000 colonists with no military. He sat with that number, 17, and thought about what it meant. 17 was not a catastrophic number. In historical terms, it was a small number. But you had to understand the context of the number, which was that it had come from people who were not soldiers, fighting with tools, and it had come in 4 hours. He thought about what the number would look like if those people had been soldiers. He thought about what it would look like if they'd had 4 days instead of 4 hours. He put the report down and asked his communications officer for the latest signal intercepts from the direction of Earth. The officer pulled them up. Yiris read them. Earth had received the alert from Kepler-7 within minutes of the attack. The colony had transmitted everything, the Voakai broadcast, the exchange with Administrator Chen, the live feed of the orbital platforms coming apart. The signal had hit Earth Command 8 hours ago. The response had been going out for 6. The content of the response was short. It was one message, broadcast on every channel, and it had already been picked up by 17 other species monitoring stations, which meant it was not a private communication. It was meant to be read. Yiris read it. To the Galactic Council and all monitoring parties. At 8:40 hours Tuesday the 14th, Voakai military forces attacked and occupied the human colony of Kepler-7 without provocation and without legal authority. Earth Command is treating this as an act of war. All human vessels, stations, and colonies are hereby placed on full military footing. Further communication will be conducted through Admiral Sira Akafer, Earth Combined Fleet Command. President's Office, Earth. He read it twice. He noted the name, Admiral Sira Akafer. He did not know the name. He had intelligence files on Earth's military leadership, and he searched his memory and the name was not there, which meant she was either new to the position or had been deliberately kept out of public records. Neither option was comforting. He also noted the phrase full military footing. He had read enough Earth history. It was part of standard Voakai diplomatic intelligence. Even if most of his colleagues had not read it carefully, to know what that phrase had meant historically. It had never meant something small. He sent a message to Grand Consul Dreth flagging the intercept. Dreth's response came back in 2 hours. Proceed with integration. Earth is posturing. Monitor and report. Eurus read that response. He saved the intercept. He saved Dreth's response. He saved his own message. He did not know precisely why he was saving them. He told himself it was standard record-keeping. He looked back at the display. On the surface of Kepler-7, his forces had secured the main settlement. The secondary mining outpost was still holding. A handful of people, no military hardware left, nothing they could fight with. His ground commander was requesting authorization to move on the outpost. He authorized it. Then he pulled up the scan of the mine shafts, 17 of them running deep into the rock. His ground commander had flagged them. People had gone in. The doors were sealed from inside, and Volkai's standard doctrine in occupied territory was to wait them out. They would come up eventually. People always came up. Eurus approved the wait. He did not order the shafts opened by force. He was not sure later why he made that choice. He told himself it was practical. Forced entry into a sealed mine shaft was costly and slow. But there was something else, something he didn't examine too closely. Something about the image of people going into the ground with their children, pulling the door shut behind them, sitting in the dark. Something that felt, if he was honest, like courage he had not expected to find in a colony of farmers. He looked at the display for a long time. Outside the shaft doors, 63 people sat in the dark and waited. Suhan Park sat with a sleeping child in her lap and memorized the sounds of the ships above, and memorized the feeling of the rock walls around her, and memorized every detail of this moment. Because she had lived long enough to know that the things you needed to remember were the things you made yourself remember in the moment, before the weight of later came down on top of them. She memorized their ships. She memorized their markings. She had nothing left to do but remember. 8 months after Kepler-7, Grand Consul Dreth held a meeting. It was supposed to be a briefing, a routine review of the campaign's progress, the kind of meeting that 4 months ago, 6 months ago, had been mostly good news delivered in orderly fashion. Territory secured, human vessels pushed back, the corridor locked down. Those meetings had been easy. This one was not. Dreth sat at the head of the long table in the Sovereign Reach's command room and looked at the faces of his senior officers and understood, in some back part of his mind, that he was not ready to listen to yet, that the faces were different now. Something had changed in them. They were still professional, still composed, but there was a quality behind their eyes that had not been there 8 months ago. He had seen that quality before. He had just never expected to see it in his own officers. Commander Eurus placed the report on the table in front of him. Dreth looked at the cover. He did not open it yet. "Give it to me directly," he said. Eurus had been doing this job for 22 years. He was not a man who flinched. He did not flinch now. But he did take a breath before he spoke, which was not his usual habit, and Dreth noticed. "Fleet losses as of this morning," Eurus said. 41% of the advance force, 17% of the second wave. 3 of our 8 resupply stations have been destroyed. The Kepler corridor is contested. We hold the colony, but we do not control the surrounding space." He paused. "The humans have established a forward command position at the Renath asteroid belt. We cannot confirm its exact location. We have tried 4 times. Dreth looked at him. 4 times. Each time we sent a search and clear group, it did not return. A pause. The 4th group was 40 ships. The room was quiet. Dreth opened the report. He looked at the numbers. He was a man who was good at reading numbers. It was one of his genuine skills, the ability to look at data and understand what it meant, which was why he had risen to Grand Consul in the first place. He read the casualty figures. He read the loss rates. He read the projections. He closed the report. "These projections," he said, "if they're accurate." "They're conservative," Eurus said. Dreth looked at him. I asked the modeling team to run 3 versions, Yiris said. Optimistic, realistic, conservative. What you're looking at is the conservative projection. The other 2 are, he stopped. They're worse. Dreth set the report down. He looked at the table. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that the officers around the table began to exchange very careful glances, the kind of glances that don't move your head. How, Dreth said finally, not angrily. He sounded like a man trying to understand something. Explain to me how a species with 42 ships 8 months ago is doing this to 11,000. Yiris had spent a lot of time thinking about this question. He had thought about it in the middle of the night, lying awake, going over the engagement records one by one. They don't fight the way we expected, he said. They don't fight the way any species fights. Every engagement model we have is built on observed behavior from species that have established military doctrines. You know the doctrine, you know what to expect. You can plan. He put his hands flat on the table. Humans don't have 200 years of doctrine. They have 60 years. So instead of doctrine, they have adaptation. Every time we develop a counter to something they've done, they've already stopped doing it. They don't repeat tactics that didn't work, not even once. All species adapt, Dreth said. Not like this. Yiris pulled up a display. The Battle of Renath II, the first one, month 3. They used a pincer formation, standard aggressive pattern. We countered with a containment spread. It worked. They lost 30 ships. He moved to the next engagement. Renath II, the second battle, 3 weeks later. No pincer. They came in from below the engagement plane. We didn't have sensors oriented that direction because no one does. It's not a standard attack vector. We lost 60 ships before we could reorient. He moved again. Outer Kepler engagement, month 5. They faked a full retreat, let us pursue, and then used the asteroid field to split our pursuit force into 3 groups. Each group was engaged separately. We lost 112 ships. He looked at Dreth. We have not seen the same human tactic twice in 8 months. They are making it up as they go, and it keeps working. Dreth looked at the display. His expression had moved away from its usual comfortable assurance and into something that was not quite anything Yiris could name. And their numbers, Dreth said. How do they keep replacing the ships? They started with 42. Earth has been manufacturing, Yiris said, 24 hours a day. They converted civilian shipyards. Cargo freighter production has stopped. They're building military vessels only. He paused. We've received intelligence that 12 other species have also sent ships in support to Earth Command. Species that were, he chose the next word carefully, species that were previously unhappy with Volkai territorial policy. Dreth was very still. How many ships? In total, including Earth's own production, our best estimate is 460 vessels currently in the human combined fleet. Yiris looked at him steadily. 8 months ago, they had 42. Ambassador Vale received the battle reports the same way everyone outside the conflict received them, through the Council's monitoring network, which was supposed to be neutral, but which everyone used to try to understand who was winning and what it meant for them. He read them in his office on the Council station, alone, with a cup of cold tea he had forgotten to drink. He did not feel satisfied. He had thought in the abstract that he might feel something like vindication, the quiet, grim feeling of having been right. He did not. What he felt was closer to what he had felt at the window 8 months ago, a kind of heavy quiet. Another Kethar diplomat, a younger man named Soveth who was attached to the trade division, came to his office in the afternoon. He knocked, and Vale told him to come in, and Soveth sat down with the careful manner of someone who had a question they weren't sure they should ask. The battle reports, Soveth said. Yes, Vale said. The humans are, it looks like there. Yes. Soveth was quiet for a moment. You don't look surprised. I'm not. You don't look pleased either. Vale looked at his cold tea. The Volkai have 83 colonies, he said. Many of them have been under Volkai control for a long time. Many of them have Volkai citizens living on them who had nothing to do with the decision to attack Kepler-7. He picked up the cup, put it down. There are no clean wars. There are just wars. Soveth sat with that. Do you think it will stop before it goes too far? Vale looked at him. Soveth was maybe 30 years old, bright, genuinely decent. He had not been in the chamber the day of the vote. He had not seen Dreth's face. I think, Vale said carefully, that Grand Consul Dreth is a man who has never been wrong about something this large. And I think that kind of man has tremendous difficulty accepting information that tells him he is wrong now. He paused. So no, I don't think it will stop because Dreth chooses to stop it. Then how does it stop? Vale thought about that for a moment. About Eurus, he had read Eurus's name in the reports, the commander who had flagged the Kepler-7 mine shafts and chosen not to force them open. He did not know if Eurus was the kind of man who could do what needed to be done. He hoped he was. Someone on their side will have to do it, he said. The Battle of the Hereth supply chain happened in month 7 and was, by any military accounting, the moment the war changed shape. The Volkai maintained 8 major resupply stations spread across their military corridor: fuel, ammunition, repair materials, medical supplies. The chain fed the advance fleet. Without it, sustained forward operations became impossible within about 6 weeks. Admiral Sira Akafer had been looking at the supply chain for 3 months. She was not a loud person. The officers who worked under her described her when they described her at all, which was not often because she did not encourage discussion of herself as quiet and thorough. She thought in long arcs. She played games from their conclusion backward to their opening, which was not the usual way people played games, but it was the way she played them. She had grown up in Lagos, studied engineering, and joined Earth's fledgling space fleet at 24 because someone needed to do it and she was good at logistics, which turned out to be the most important thing in any military operation, and also the thing most commanders found boring. She did not find it boring. Logistics was the skeleton of every plan, the part that didn't show, but that everything else hung on. She had been watching the Volkai supply chain for 3 months, and she had a plan. The plan was not dramatic. That was intentional. Dramatic plans had single points of failure. Her plan had no single point. It was 7 small actions that together produced one result, and each small action looked in isolation like a different kind of operation. A probe here. A false retreat there. 2 small engagements near Volkai Station 4 that appeared to be attempts to take the station and were not. What they actually were was movement. Getting ships into position without the Volkai understanding what position they were moving into. On the night before she executed the plan, she sat in her quarters on the command carrier Cape Town and looked at the operational map for a long time. She had a cup of coffee, real coffee, from beans her mother had sent in a care package 3 months ago, which she was rationing carefully because there would not be more for a while. The coffee was excellent. Her mother grew it herself on a small farm outside the city, and it had arrived with a note that said, "Come home safe. The garden misses you." Akafer looked at the operational map. She thought about Kepler-7. She thought about the colony's final transmission before the platforms went down. She had watched it many times, the gray-haired woman in the community hall, the people moving behind her. She had found out, after the occupation, that the woman's name was Park Soo-han, that she had survived in a mine shaft, that she had gotten out 63 people including 29 children. She thought about that. She drank her coffee. In the morning, she gave the order. The 7 actions began simultaneously across 400 kilometers of contested space. The Volkai response went to the most visible action, the largest human force, moving directly toward Station 4 exactly as she had expected. They pulled ships from their secondary screening positions. They tightened the formation around the station, which opened the corridor behind them. 80 human ships came through the corridor in 2 minutes, not toward the stations, past them, toward the automated relay network that connected all 8 stations to each other and to Voakai Prime. The relay network was not heavily defended. It was infrastructure, not a target, and the Voakai had not thought of it as something worth defending. Akefer had been thinking about it for 3 months. The relay network went dark in 4 minutes. Without it, the 8 stations could not coordinate. Without coordination, the resupply chain was 8 separate stations instead of one system. 6 of the 8 were destroyed or disabled in the following 2 hours. The other 2 were cut off. Yiris received the report on the bridge of the Sovereign Reach and read it standing up. He read it twice. Then he turned to the display. He pulled up the full strategic map, all of Voakai military space, the colony corridor, the contested zones, the engagement lines. He looked at all of it together, which he had not done for several weeks because looking at it piece by piece was easier. The pieces were still manageable, but looking at all of it together. He looked at it together. He looked at how many of the lights had changed color in the last 8 months. Red for lost, yellow for contested. Red and yellow had spread through the map in a way that was very clear when you stepped back far enough to see the whole thing. There were a lot of lights that had been blue 8 months ago. He thought about what he would say to Dreth. He thought about the fleet numbers, the supply chain, the rate of change in the engagement patterns. He thought about the modeling team's 3 projections, optimistic, realistic, conservative, and where they were now against those projections. They were not on the optimistic line. They were not on the realistic line. Yiris looked at the star map. He looked at how many lights had gone dark. He made a decision that he had been approaching for weeks, the way you approach the edge of something, knowing it's there, not quite letting yourself arrive at it. He arrived at it now. He called his communications officer. "I need a private channel," he said. "Encrypted, non-Voakai routing, use the Mehari civilian network. I don't want it touching our military system." The officer looked at him. "Sir." "Do it," Yiris said. The officer did it. Yiris sat down and thought about what to say and how to say it. He thought about Kepler 7, and the mine shaft doors sealed from the inside, and the woman in the community hall who had told them to get out of human space, and the number 17, which had not stopped sitting at the back of his mind in 8 months. He thought about the star map and the dark lights. He thought about how many more lights were going to go dark before Dreth was willing to look at the whole map at once. He started writing. He wrote to Admiral Sira Akefer, Earth Combined Fleet Command. He did not know if she would respond. He did not know if he was too late or not late enough, or exactly the right amount of late for the kind of conversation he needed to have. He did not know if she was the kind of person who could be talked to. He knew he had to try. He sent the message. Then he looked at the star map for a long time. Dreth looked at the star map and for the first time noticed how many of the lights had gone dark. Akefer read Yiris's message 3 times. The first time she read it fast, the way she read everything fast, scanning for the shape of it, the intent, the thing underneath the words. The second time she read it slowly, looking for the trap. The third time she read it like a document, carefully, the way her engineering training had taught her to read specifications, looking for what was stated, what was implied, and what was absent. What was stated: Commander Yiris, senior military officer of the Voakai Advance Fleet, was requesting a private meeting. No weapons, 1 ship each, neutral coordinates which he proposed and she could reject and replace with her own. What was implied? He was doing this without authorization. The routing she'd traced, her signals team had spent 4 hours on it, went through the Mehari civilian network. He had deliberately kept it off Voakai military channels. What was absent? Any mention of Grand Consul Dreth. She sat with the message for a day. Not because she was undecided, she knew within the first hour what she was going to do, but because the decision carried weight and she believed in giving weight its proper time. She had a habit of this. Her officers sometimes found it unnerving, the way she went quiet before a major call. They had learned to leave her alone when she went quiet. She changed his proposed coordinates to her own, a stretch of empty space in the outer Renath region, far from both fleets, where the nearest star was a dim red dwarf that gave off just enough light to navigate by and nothing else. She sent the response through the same Mehari routing he had used. He confirmed within 2 hours. She took one ship, a small fast courier, the Ibadan, with a crew of 12. She left behind her second in command with sealed orders and went. The Ibadan and Eurus's ship, a light scout vessel, as promised, smaller than the courier, arrived at the coordinates within 20 minutes of each other. No weapons were charged on either side. Her sensors confirmed it. She had people watching his ship every second of the approach and would continue watching for the duration. Eurus came across alone in a shuttle. She met him in the Ibadan's small conference room, which was not designed for diplomatic meetings. It had a folding table and 4 bolted-down chairs, and a wall display that currently showed a navigation map. And she did not apologize for its appearance, because it was what they had, and she was not in the habit of apologizing for circumstances. She was already in the room when he came through the door. She had not dressed for a meeting. She was in her working uniform, which was plain and dark and showed no decorations because she had never seen the point of wearing decorations. Her coffee was on the table. She had not offered him anything and would not until she understood what he was there for. He was taller than she expected. Volkai were broadly built, heavier in the chest and shoulders than most species, and Eurus had the particular posture of someone who had spent a long career in military service, straight without being rigid, the straightness of habit rather than effort. He looked at her with the kind of directness she respected even in someone she was not sure she trusted. He sat down across from her without being invited to, which she also respected. "Admiral Akefer," he said. "Commander Eurus," she said. A moment of quiet, she let it sit, she was in no hurry. "I'll tell you why I'm here," he said, which she appreciated. She had expected more preamble. "Please." "The war is going in one direction," he said. "You know that, I know that. The supply chain engagement last week made certain things clear." He put his hands on the table. "I believe there is still a point at which this can be concluded without the complete destruction of Volkai military capacity. I believe that point is close to ending." He looked at her steadily. "I am here to find out if you are willing to discuss terms before it ends." She looked at him. She had a quality in these moments of being entirely still, not tense, not cold, just completely present, like a person who has stopped spending attention on anything except the thing directly in front of them. "Who sent you?" she said. "No one. Dreth doesn't know you're here." "No. So you're not authorized to offer me anything." "A beat, I'm authorized to listen," he said, "and to take back what I hear." She nodded slowly. She picked up her coffee, she drank it, she set it down. "I have one question first," she said, "before we talk terms." "All right. Where is Grand Consul Dreth?" Eurus looked at her. He had prepared for a number of opening questions. He had not prepared for this one, which told her something useful. "On Volkai Prime," he said, "at the Council of Ministers." "Not here, not directing the campaign. He delegates operational command to me." "From Volkai Prime," she said, "while his fleet loses 41% of its advance force." Eurus said nothing. "I'm not asking to embarrass you," she said. "I'm asking because it matters for what I'm about to tell you." She set down her coffee. "Terms. You want to know our terms. I'll tell you, and I'll tell you simply, because simple is better than clever when you need someone to actually hear you." She leaned forward slightly. "The Volkai fleet withdraws from all human-claimed space. Every ship, every station, every piece of equipment, within 90 days. She held up one finger. "All annexed territories, not just human ones, everything the Volkai have taken by force in the last 30 years are released. The populations in those territories choose their own administration. Second finger. Full reparations to Kepler 7. Not a number I name, a number the survivors name. Whatever they say. Third finger. Grand Consul Dreth appears before a Galactic Council tribunal. Crimes against a civilian population. The attack on the hospital ward. She stopped. Eurus was very still. She looked at him. You knew about the hospital ward. It was not a question. He looked at the table. I was not present when. I know you weren't. I have the engagement records. I know where you were. She let that sit for just a moment. I also know you didn't force the mine shaft doors. I know 63 people are alive because of that. She paused. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I know the difference between you and Dreth. That difference is why you're sitting across from me right now instead of in a detention facility. Eurus looked up. Take those terms back to him, she said. Tell him they're final. Tell him. She stopped. She looked at her coffee for a moment, looked back. Tell him the next phase of this campaign looks different from the last 8 months. Tell him we're done being careful about what we hit. She said it quietly. That was the part that landed. Eurus studied her face. She let him look. She had nothing to hide in her face. She was not angry. She was not performing. She was a person telling another person the truth about a situation clearly, without decoration. He won't accept them, Eurus said. I know. He looked at her. Then why? Because I want it on record that the offer was made. She picked up her coffee again. And I want you to have heard them, personally, from me. She paused, for after. He understood what she meant by after. She could see it in his face. He was not a stupid man. He sat for a moment longer. Then he stood. He had come with questions and she had answered all of them, more directly than he had expected, and there was nothing left to sit for. The terms will be recorded on my ship's log, he said. Non-Voakai routing. In case, he stopped. In case, she agreed. He nodded. He moved toward the door. Commander Eurus, she said. He turned. The hospital ward, she said. 22 children. I want you to have that number. She said it without heat. Not for me, for when you're deciding what to do next. He left. She sat alone in the conference room for a while after his shuttle cleared the Ibadan. She drank the last of her coffee. She looked at the navigation map on the wall. She thought about the terms and about Dreth, and about what she had just told Eurus. The next phase looks different, and about what that meant and what it would cost and what it would leave behind. She did not enjoy what she was planning. She had never enjoyed any of it. That was not the point. The point was finishing what had been started, which was not her fault, and doing it as cleanly as possible, which was the only standard she held herself to anymore. She signaled the bridge, set course back. Eurus delivered the terms to Dreth in person. He flew to Voakai Prime and went directly to the Council of Ministers building, which was all white stone and high windows, and the kind of architecture that was meant to make visitors feel small. He had been here many times. It had never made him feel small until now. Dreth received him in his private office. It was a large room. The desk was very old, a gift from a species that had been absorbed into Voakai territory 40 years ago. Dreth sat behind it in a chair that was slightly higher than the chairs available to anyone sitting across from him, which was deliberate and had always been deliberate, and Eurus had never thought about it until this moment. He delivered the terms. He delivered them exactly as Akafor had given them, clearly, simply, in order. He did not add anything. He did not soften anything. He had thought on the flight back about whether to frame them differently, and he had decided against it, because Akafor had been direct with him and he owed the same to Dreth, regardless of what Dreth did with it. Dreth listened. His face moved through several expressions: irritation, contempt, something that flickered briefly in his eyes when Eurus said the word tribunal, then back to contempt. When Eurus finished, Dreth was quiet for a long moment. She wants me to stand trial, Dreth said. Yes. Before the Galactic Council. Before a council tribunal, yes. Dreth looked at him. She called it crimes against a civilian population. Yes. For a military operation authorized by council vote. Eurus said nothing. Dreth stood up. He moved to the window. The view from his office was the capital city, broad and white and built over centuries, layer upon layer of Volcae civilization going back further than most species had written language. He looked at it for a while. She is a barbarian, Dreth said, not viciously, almost thoughtfully. 60 years in space, and she thinks she can dictate terms to a civilization 900 years old. Sir, I want the second fleet activated, Dreth said. He turned from the window. His face had settled back into its familiar expression, assured, decided, the face of a man who had never seriously entertained the possibility that he might be wrong about something this important. Full mobilization, all available ships. We hit their forward command position and we hit Earth directly. One strike, maximum force, and this is over. Eurus looked at him. He had prepared for this answer, too. He had been preparing for it on the flight back. That will not work, Eurus said. Dreth looked at him. I am telling you that it will not work, Eurus said. His voice was steady. I have the engagement records. I have the loss projections. I have been watching this campaign for 8 months, and I am telling you directly that a full mobilization strike against Earth will not end this war. It will deepen it. We cannot win a long war against these people. We are not built for what they are built for. They will absorb the loss and come back harder, and we will have nothing left to absorb with. He stopped. Dreth looked at him for a long time. Activate the second fleet, he said. His voice had not changed. It was still calm, still decided, still the voice of a man behind a desk that was built to make other men feel smaller. Eurus looked at him. He had said what he came to say. He had said it clearly. There was nothing left to say after that. He left the office. He walked through the white stone building and out into the capital city and stood for a moment in the open air. Volcae Prime was a beautiful planet, old, layered with history and architecture and meaning. He had been born here. He had walked these streets as a child. He thought about Akafer's last words to him, for after. He went back to his ship. He transmitted a message through the Mahari network, 5 words. He refused. Terms are rejected. Elder Suhan Park stood before what remained of the Galactic Council. Not all the members were present. 7 delegations had withdrawn from the council chamber since the war began, 2 because they were Volcae allies, 5 because they had declared formal support for Earth, and the council's rules prevented active belligerents from floor access. The remaining members sat in their tiered seats in the big black stone chamber, and the room felt empty in a way it had not felt 8 months ago. Suhan stood at the floor-level podium. She was 67 years old, and she was wearing ordinary clothes, not formal wear, not anything prepared for the occasion, because she had not had time to prepare anything and would not have known what to prepare anyway. She had been brought here on a fast diplomatic transport, and it had been explained to her on the journey that her testimony was being entered into the formal council record, which meant it would exist permanently, which meant it mattered permanently. She stood at the podium and looked up at the tiers of alien faces and thought about Davy, the boy who had slept on her lap in the mine shaft, who was currently staying with another family on Earth while his parents' case was processed, his parents being among the ones who had not come out of the main settlement. She thought about what she wanted to say and how to say it. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not use notes. She described Kepler 7 as it had been the ore haulers, the orange light, the community hall where everyone gathered for decisions, the medical station where Dr. Renard worked, and where, on a Tuesday morning, 22 children between the ages of 3 and 9 had been in the ward for various ordinary childhood things, broken bones, respiratory infections, a minor surgery. She described what the ward looked like after. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She had done all of that already, in the mine shaft, in the months after, in the small hours of the night in the quarters she had been given on Earth. She had no more of it to spend here. She said what she had seen. She said it plainly. When she finished, the chamber was completely silent. The council speaker, Solis, 22 years in the job, permanent expression of a woman who had stopped being surprised by anything, said, in a voice that was not entirely steady, "The testimony of Elder Park is entered into the formal record." Suhan nodded. She stepped down from the podium. Ambassador Vale, watching from his seat in the middle tiers, did not speak. He had not intended to speak. He watched Suhan Park walk calmly across the chamber floor and exit through the side door, and he sat with the silence she had left behind her. He thought about what Dreth had said, 900 years of civilization. He thought about what 11 minutes of plain words could do to a room that had been congratulating itself on its civilization for centuries. Akafor received Eurus's message 30 minutes after Suhan left the chamber. She read it. She finished her coffee. She gave one order. She did not enjoy what came next. But she did not stop it either. The second Volkai fleet was 11,000 ships. It had taken 3 weeks to mobilize, pulling vessels from patrol routes, from colony defense positions, from the training yards where new crews were still being certified. Dreth had ordered full mobilization, and full mobilization was what he got. 11,000 ships assembled at the staging point near Volkai Prime's outer ring, the largest single military force the Volkai had put together in 200 years. It was an impressive thing to look at. Even Eurus, who knew what was coming, stood on the bridge of the Sovereign Reach and looked at the formation on the tactical display and felt something move through him. Pride was not the right word. Something older than pride. The recognition of scale, the way scale could still affect you even when you knew it wasn't enough. Dreth had given the order from his office on Volkai Prime. He was not here. He was directing the campaign from the capital, which was his right as Grand Consul. Eurus had not argued about it. There was nothing left to argue about. The fleet moved. Akafor had been waiting for the fleet to move for 3 weeks. She had known it was coming. Eurus's message had said terms rejected, not fleet standing down, and those were two very different things. She had used the 3 weeks well. She had not moved toward Volkai Prime. She had done something that looked on any scan like a defense posture, pulling her fleet back, consolidating, covering the approaches to human core space. It was not a defense posture. It was a door. She had spent 3 weeks building a door, and when the Volkai Second Fleet came through it, the door closed. The engagement that followed lasted 9 hours. It covered a volume of space 2 light minutes across, and involved approximately 12,000 vessels on both sides, because the 460 ships she had started with had continued to grow. Earth's yards had not stopped. The allied species had continued sending support, and what had been 460 ships 3 weeks ago was now 612. The tactical records of the battle were reviewed by military historians for decades after. Most of them focused on the same thing, not the scale, not the lost numbers, but the coordination. The human fleet and its allied vessels moved like a single organism, responsive and coherent across the full engagement volume. Every time the Volkai formation shifted, the human response was already in motion, not reactive, anticipatory. Akafor had gamed this battle 900 times over 3 weeks. She knew every response pattern in Volkai military doctrine because Eurus had, quietly, sent her access to the doctrine files through the Mehari network the day after his meeting with Dreth. She had not asked for them. He had sent them anyway. She used every one of them. At the 4-hour mark, the Volkai formation began to fragment, not breaking apart, not yet, but losing coherence. The outer elements unable to coordinate with the center because the relay network was gone, and the backup communication systems were being actively jammed by 3 human specialist vessels that had done nothing but jam all day. At the 6-hour mark, the fragmentation became retreat. At the 9-hour mark, what was left of the second Volkai fleet was running for home. Akefer watched it go. She sat in her chair on the bridge of the Cape Town and watched the tactical display clear, ship by ship, as the Volkai vessels jumped to faster than light. Around her, the bridge crew were exhaling, some of them quietly, some not quietly, the sounds of people who have been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and have just put it down. She let them have it. She sat with the display and looked at her own losses. 94 ships, more than 4,000 people. She looked at the numbers for a long time and did not look away from them because she believed in looking at costs directly, without softening, and carrying them accurately. Then she gave the order to follow. The fall of Volkai Prime was not a bombardment. Akefer had been clear about this from the beginning, and she held to it even when 3 of her allied commanders pushed for it, arguing that a bombardment would be faster and cleaner and would end the threat permanently. She listened to all 3 arguments and rejected them all for the same reason. Humans did not glass planets. It was not a rule anyone had written down. It was not in any military code or treaty. It was simply what she knew to be true about what she was and what she represented, and there was a line on one side of which she was a commander finishing a war, and on the other side of which she was something she did not want to be. She knew where the line was. She stayed on her side of it. What came instead of bombardment was something the Volkai had no doctrine for, because their doctrine assumed that a species powerful enough to reach their homeworld would destroy it. They had no contingency for landing. The human fleet arrived at Volkai Prime's outer defensive ring and took it apart systematically over 6 hours. Every step was communicated: what was happening, what would happen next, what the population on the surface could do to ensure their safety. Akefer's communications team broadcast on every channel, continuously, in Volkai, and in the 3 most common secondary languages used across their territory. Then the ships landed. Not to burn, to hold. Volkai Prime's capital was occupied by human and allied forces in 18 hours. There was resistance, pockets of it, in 4 districts, from military units that had stayed rather than retreated, and the fighting in those hours was close and costly, and Akefer did not minimize it in her reports. But 18 hours after the first landing craft touched down, the capital was held. Dreth was not in his office when they arrived. He was not in the Council of Ministers building. He was not at the Military Command Center, which was the second place they looked. He was found on the 3rd day in a hardened shelter beneath his private residence, a facility built into the bedrock, designed for exactly this contingency, stocked with enough supplies for 6 months. He had been there since the Second Fleet broke. The soldier who found him was a 23-year-old from Earth named Corporal Adisa, who had grown up in Accra, who had joined the fleet 4 months after Kepler-7 because someone needed to, and he was healthy and available and angry in the way that young men get angry when something is done to their people. He had been angry for a long time. He had carried it through 9 months of war. He stood in the entrance of the shelter and looked at Dreth, and his anger went somewhere he didn't expect. Not away, just quiet, like a fire that had been burning a long time and had found the thing it was burning toward and did not know what to do next except be still. Dreth looked back at him. He was in his formal robes, which he had apparently put on for this. His expression was composed. He had the look of a man who had made peace with a thing, or was performing having made peace with a thing, and Adisa could not tell which. "I surrender to Earth Command," Dreth said formally, "in Volkai." Adisa didn't speak Volkai, he spoke into his comm. "I've got him, level 4, subsection 9, he's talking." He kept his weapon where it was. He did not raise it. He stood in the entrance and waited for someone senior to come down, and while he waited he looked at Dreth, and Dreth looked at him, and neither of them said anything else. Eurus had taken the sovereign reach out of the formation before the battle ended. Not fleeing. He had stayed through 6 of the 9 hours. But when the retreat became irreversible, he had separated, quietly, and taken the ship to the coordinates he had been holding in his navigation system since the day after his meeting with Akafar. He was at those coordinates when the message came that Voakai Prime had fallen. He sat with that for a long time. Then he transmitted his own surrender to Earth Command, with his location, his ship's identification, and a request that his crew be treated under the terms Akafar had offered him in the Ibadan's conference room. He included the record he had been keeping since Kepler-7, all of it, the engagement logs, Dreth's response to the terms, the fleet orders, the communications. Everything he had saved because he had not known why he was saving it and had kept saving it anyway. The response from Earth Command came back in 2 hours. It was brief. Surrender accepted. Hold position. We are coming to you. The trial of Grand Consul Dreth lasted 11 days. It was held on the council station, in the big black stone chamber, because there was nowhere else large enough and neutral enough, and because the Galactic Council, reduced now to 31 active members, the Voakai seats empty, had formally requested the venue, which was their way of saying that the council acknowledged what had happened and wanted to be seen acknowledging it. Akafar did not testify. She submitted records, the engagement logs, the casualty figures, the broadcast from the Kepler-7 Community Hall, the transcript of her meeting with Eurus, the hospital ward documentation. She organized them carefully and submitted them without comment because the documents were already common enough. Eurus testified. He spoke for 2 days. He was precise and detailed and did not soften anything, including his own role in the occupation of Kepler-7. When the examining officer asked him why he had chosen to contact Akafar without authorization, he said, "Because someone had to." When the officer asked him why he had saved the records, he said, "Because I thought there would be a day when they mattered." Vale testified last. He had been asked to speak as a witness to the council session 8 months earlier, the vote, the debate, the warning. He sat in the witness chair in the chamber where he had given that speech and answered questions for 3 hours. At the end, the examining officer asked him, "Was there anything in the aftermath that surprised you?" Vale thought about the question seriously, the way he thought about all questions. "No," he said. "Nothing." Considered, the speed, he said. "I had expected it to take longer, but the shape of it, no. The shape of it was exactly what I described in my warning, which means the information was available. It was always available." He looked at the floor for a moment. "What surprised me, if anything, is how little it would have taken to avoid all of this. Not much, just the ability to hear something you don't want to hear." He paused. "That is a small thing to ask. Most people find it very difficult." Dreth was convicted on 11 counts. He was not executed. There was significant debate about this. 3 of the allied species pressed for it, and Akafar received formal inquiries from 4 governments asking Earth Command's position. Earth Command's position was trial and imprisonment, not execution. She had been asked about this privately by a journalist who had been given access to write a record of the war. The journalist asked why, given everything, she had argued against the harsher sentence. Akafar had thought about the question. "Because he needs to be alive to watch what happens next," she said. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. What happened next was 12 years of rebuilding, Kepler-7 and the other colony that had been hit in month 3, and the species whose territories the Voakai had annexed over 30 years, who were now sorting out what self-governance looked like after decades of someone else's administration. It was complicated and slow and full of arguments and setbacks, and the kind of grinding daily work that does not look like victory, but is the only form victory actually takes in the long run. Earth contributed to all of it: ships, materials, technical staff, medical teams. Akafar signed 53 bilateral agreements in the 2 years after the war ended. She drank a lot of terrible coffee at a lot of negotiating tables and did not enjoy most of it, which was fine, because she had never required enjoyment from her work, only results. Dreth watched from his cell, which was comfortable and well-maintained because she had specified that too. She was not interested in cruelty. She was interested in the thing she had told Yiris about in the Ibadan's conference room, the thing she had called after. After was taking shape, slowly, messily, in the way of all real things. Ambassador Vale visited Earth for the second time 2 years after the war ended. He had not planned to. He had retired from the Kethar diplomatic service 6 months after the trial quietly, without ceremony, because he was old and tired, and had spent enough of his life in chambers with high ceilings trying to say true things to rooms that were not listening. He had gone home to the Kethar homeworld and spent a season doing very little, which was unfamiliar and which he found, to his surprise, he did not mind. Then he had booked passage to Earth. He had not told anyone. He went alone. The city he arrived in was called Nairobi. He had not been here on his first visit. His first visit had been elsewhere: Geneva for the diplomatic meetings, Johannesburg for the museum. Nairobi was different. It was large and fast and layered, old buildings alongside new ones, markets alongside transit stations, trees growing up through infrastructure that had been built around them rather than clearing them. He walked for most of the first day. He did not have a plan. He looked at things. He ate food from a stall near a transit station, something with rice and a sauce he could not identify that was considerably hotter than he expected, and which he ate entirely anyway. He sat on a bench in a park where children were playing a game that involved a ball and rules he could not follow and a tremendous amount of noise. He was sitting on the bench watching the game when a child came and stood in front of him. She was maybe 8 years old. She had the direct, unabashed curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to perform social uncertainty. She looked at him, his gray Kethar coloring, his age, the particular way his eyes were set, with open interest. "What are you?" she said. "A traveler," he said. "Where did you come from?" "Far away." She considered this. "Is it nice there?" He looked at her. Behind her, the game continued, shouting and running, an argument about the rules and laughter. Around the park, the city moved, ordinary and loud, and full of the texture of people living in proximity to each other, which was always full of friction and noise and occasional beauty. He thought about the Galactic Council chamber. He thought about Dreth's smile. He thought about the vote and the window and the cold blue-white light of the corridor. He thought about Suhan Park and 11 minutes of plain words in a silent room. He thought about Kepler 7, the orange light, the ore haulers, 40,000 people who had looked at 1,100 ships and shot at them with a hunting rifle and an ore cannon, and a loaded freighter driven at full speed by someone who jumped clear at the last second. He thought about what it meant to be made of 10,000 years of surviving yourself, and what that did to you, and what it made you capable of, and what it cost. He looked at the child. "It was," he said, "before we made the mistake of thinking we were the most dangerous thing in the sky." The child thought about this with the seriousness that children bring to things that do not quite make sense to them, but that they recognize as meaning something. "Are you staying?" she said. He looked around the park, the game, the trees, the city beyond, building on top of building on top of history on top of grief on top of the next thing and the next. "For a while," he said. She seemed satisfied with this. She turned and ran back toward the game, which had generated a new dispute about something and required her immediate attention. Vale sat on the bench in the afternoon light, which was a different color than the light on the Kethar homeworld, sharper, more gold than orange, and watched the children play. He stayed until the light began to change. Then he got up and walked back into the city and disappeared into the noise of it, one more traveler from far away, moving through a world that had learned something, the way the world always learned things, too late, at tremendous cost, and forward into whatever came next.